Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to announce the speaker today. It's actually my brother. Tony Buettner is the organizational leader at Blue Zones, which puts the learning of world's longest lived people to work in people's lives, families, and communities. The title of Tony's presentation is Blue Zones, Secret of Long Life. I wanted to keep that short because I'd be remiss not to take advantage of to jab my older sibling in public. And so I will recount one short story. And you may have known from a previous presentation I did a lot of biking. And Tony actually came on a number of our biking trips, but I remember the first one we were bicycling through Central America, and we were just in southern Mexico, and it was the first day, and you can imagine the first day, it was hot and muggy, and we were putting in a lot of miles. And we stopped, and Tony wasn't around. And we waited, and about a half hour came by, and then 45 minutes came by, and an hour came by, and then finally we saw Tony come up. And he took his bike, and he threw it on the ground. He says, "Well, I'm done with this biking. This is crazy. I ain't going to do this anymore." And I said, "Well, what's the matter?" He goes, "This is too tough." And I looked at his bike, and I said, "It would help if you shift into a lower gear." And so, but seriously, we are a family of four brothers. We get along famously, and it's my privilege to invite Tony to speak today.
Thank you so much. What an honor to be here. I appreciate giving me the time, and what an honor to have Steve introduce me. As he said, we come from a family of four boys. Our father was a teacher, my mother a stay-at-home mom, and we were adventurers. I'm not sure if you know it or not, but why most of us were going on to start careers, my brothers Steve and Dan started biking around the world. Their first trip was from the northern tip of Alaska to the southern tip of South America. If you look at it, it's really not that big of a deal. It's really all downhill. Their second trip was around the 45th parallel of the Earth, and the last one here from the northern tip of Africa to the southern tip of Africa. All four of us boys have been part of these trips. My father actually joined. Steve has 2 Guinness Book World Records. My brother Dan has 3. What happened from these trips was National Geographic caught on to Dan's work and asked him if he would find the longest lived populations and share those secrets to the rest of the world. So our premise simply was if we could find the right environments and lifestyles, because that's 80% of how long you'd live, we'd have the de facto recipe. And after 15 years of research, we found what we call the Blue Zones, and it's here that we look to the secrets of longevity. The first Blue Zone was found here on the island of Sardinia. It's here you get the longest lived men. They live 10 years longer than we do here in America. What we find there is a population eating mostly a plant-based diet. We see a population that keeps their aging parents close, and we know that affords an additional 4 to 6 years of longevity. It's here that you see 103-year-old men biking to work, chopping wood, and beating my older brother, Dan, in an arm wrestling tournament. So Steve can pick on me, I can pick on Dan. Ground zero for longevity we found on the island of Okinawa. It's here you see a population that has the longest disability life expectancy in the world. They live 7 good years longer than we do on average. There's 5 times as many centenarians, 1/6 the rate of breast and colon cancer, 1/5 the rate of cardiovascular disease. What we find here is a population that's committed to friendships and committed social networks that travel through life together. They're formed at age 2. They go throughout life. They're called moais. We find a culture that doesn't even have a word for retirement. Instead, you see purpose, sense of purpose in everything they do. And we know people that have that sense of purpose live 7 good years longer than those that don't. We found America's Blue Zone here in Loma Linda, California. This is a city here in America like every other one, but they live 10 years longer than we do. And why is that? Well, we find a large concentration of Seventh-day Adventists. We see 106-year-old active cowboys, 106-year-old men water skiing on the weekend, and 104-year-old women pumping iron. But what we find here is over and over again, you see people moving naturally, having the right outlook. eating wisely, and connecting. We found our fourth blue zone on the Nicoya Peninsula. The whole population lives 8 years longer than we do. And then our last blue zone we found here on the island of Ikaria, Greece. Again, this population lives about 9 years longer than we do on average. There's almost no dementia and no chronic disease. So this work was captured in National Geographic. To date, it's the second most read edition of National Geographic in their 129-year history. Dan has written three books that are all New York Times bestsellers, capturing our work around happiness and blue zones. We found secrets. We call them the Power Nine. Again, these people don't belong to gyms and run marathons. They move naturally, on average every 20 minutes. They have the right outlook. They have strategies to reverse stress. They have a profound sense of purpose. They eat wisely. Every one of these populations on average drank about 1.5 glasses of wine. And I know what you're thinking. Can I save up and have 9 on Friday night? No. They ate a plant-based diet. They had strategies not to overeat, and they connected. They put their families first. They belong to a faith-based community. We talked to 263 centenarians. Only 3 did not belong to a faith-based community. And we know people that show up, minimum of 4 times a month or more, live 4 to 14 years longer than those that don't. And then lastly, this idea of social connectivity. We know that this is as contagious as a cold. If you have 3 best friends that smoke, you have a 160% greater chance of smoking. It's the same with obesity, loneliness, and depression, but imagine if behaviors are positive. With another grant from National Geographic, we were asked to study community health initiatives around the world and come up with a way to change population health, and we created the Life Radius. And what we do is we take the focus off the person, telling them what to do. We look at environments and lifestyles. We help people optimize their home so healthy choices are easy. We help communities create these moais and committed social networks around healthy eating. We put on purpose workshops so people can identify their sense of purpose. And then we work with those places where we shop, where we work, where our kids go to school, implementing evidence-based strategies to make the healthy choice easy. And then lastly, we work with government officials on how to increase better foods and accessibility, built environment policy and tobacco policy to make the healthy choice easy. The question, would all this work? AARP invited us to try to transform an American city into a blue zone. So in 2008, we chose Albert Lea. We came in and we listened to understand what their challenges and goals were. When we started there, Albert Lea pretty much looked like it was abandoned. It's been 8 years now. We helped them put in walkways, bikeways to get people moving and connecting. We worked with green spaces to put in community gardens, farmers markets. We brought in Brian Wansik from the Cornell Food Lab to help transform restaurants so healthy choices were easier. We worked with grocery stores to label healthy foods and healthy checkout lanes. We brought in Dr. Leslie Lyle from the University of Minnesota to help with policy. How many of you walked to school when you were a child? Please raise your hand. About 85%. Today it is 11%. But we wonder why our kids are obese and overweight, but it's actually safer to walk to school today. Then we formed moais. We had about 16% of the population agree to walk for 10 weeks. They walked 35 million steps and lost 17,000 pounds. We worked with work sites and had a big kickoff event. The eyes of the world were on us. When the results came in, they were stunning. 38% drop in city workers' health care claims. Tobacco usage down 17% in the county. But what we had formed was a coalition of 200 volunteers from that community that continue to move the needle in population health, and Albert Lea is recognized as an expert community in population health around the world. We had Walter Willett from Harvard come in and embed himself and call our work amazing because we implement only evidence-based permanent and semi-permanent changes to environments. So this work lasts. We started in Albert Lea, Minnesota, population of about 18,000. We partnered with a company called Healthways to scale this work throughout the nation. Our first pilot project was in the beach cities of California, population of about 131,000. After 2 years, we see a drop in obesity in that population. a drop in tobacco usage, people moving more, eating better. And after 5 years, this population has reported a 50% drop in childhood obesity. This is bucking the trend. That caught the eye of the governor of Iowa, who asked us to be the cornerstone of his Healthiest State initiative. We're currently working with 15 cities in Iowa. Actually, 19% of the population now lives in an American Blue Zone in the state of Iowa. Our largest project currently is in Fort Worth, Texas, the 16th largest city in the country. We have 45 employees hired from that community and over 2,000 volunteers leading this work amongst 800,000 people. Our second statewide initiative is current in Hawaii. We're working with 6 different cities there, transforming the whole state. We just launched our third statewide initiative in Oregon. We have projects going now in 8 states and 30 communities in just 7 short years. There's a health epidemic here in America. 68% of people are overweight or obese. Diabetes is skyrocketing, and this is the one that kills me because I have a daughter. For the first time in human history, it's projected that our children will live less long lives than us. And I ask you, is that because we're stupid? Of course not. Is it because we don't love our kids as much as our parents loved us? And again, of course not. We live in environments that nudge us into unhealthy choices day after day after day. And what the Blue Zone Project is doing is empowering communities, families, and individuals, employers, to use the learnings of the longest lived populations to implement permanent and semi-permanent changes to the built environment, social networks, and the buildings that we work and shop and play in, so that the healthy choice is the easy choice. And believe me, this work is not easy. No one has ever done this before. But we're starting to see hospital systems and insurers around the country implement strategies born here in Minnesota to make our lives longer and healthier. And as what Dan always says, there's no silver bullet here, but what we do is unleash silver buckshot. Thank you very much. Question, sir. In Okinawa, the way that they have, the strategy not to overeat there is when they sit down to eat, they simply say this, hare hachebu. And when you translate that, it simply means stop eating when you're 80% full. So we were all taught to finish your plate. But do you have to finish your plate? What the Okinawans do is actually eat off of smaller plates. And they remind themselves, because it takes so many minutes for your stomach to tell your brain you're full. And by that small thing, they're able to cut out 20% of their calories in every meal. Thank you. Yeah, the question was, how does arts and culture lead into this work? What we did was hire demographers, anthropologists, medical researchers, epidemiologists to embed and try to actually live with these populations and figure out what was going on. There's no strategy that we have in our population health book that speaks right to art. But what we do see is people downshifting, music, working together. What we see in our cities is beautifying areas and walking paths through cities with different art stations and play making. So there are some pieces, but it's not really a big cornerstone of the work that we do. Thanks for the question. Sir?
How do you guys make?
Yeah, thank you. We are a for-profit company. The work started, the expeditions that we went on first bicycling was, Dan and Steve wrote letters of what they might need and had donations. In the gap, they went out to Minnesota employers. 3M was one. When we started the population health work, it was funded by the National Institute of Aging and National Geographic. When we started our first project in Albert Lea, it was AARP and the United Foundation that came to us and asked, could you replicate a Blue Zone and what would that cost? And they gifted 13 months to Albert Lea. After that, we signed an exclusive 10-year deal with Healthways to let them actually roll these projects out. We still manage them as the architect, and we're part of all of them. They pay us a fee for that. And most of these projects in the early days were funded by Blue Cross Blue Shield. our name fit well, their mission fit well, and to have a healthier population, it helps them as well, both in goodwill and the bottom line. What we've seen since the Affordable Care Act is hospital systems understanding they no longer can operate the same way. They need to be partners in preventative health, and they will be compensated for a healthy population. So you see these hospital systems actually fully or partially funding in, excuse me, in Texas, we see a model where it's Blue Cross Blue Shield, a hospital system, Lockheed Martin, Bell Helicopter, foundations, and philanthropy. In one of our projects that will be starting this fall in New York, it's actually the most unhealthy county in that state, and it's a philanthropist who is funding an 8-year project there. Yeah, great question, and thank you so much. Purpose is we found it's one of the 9 pillars of Blue Zones, is having a sense of purpose. We know from research that people that get up in the morning with a mission statement or a profound sense of purpose live 7 years longer than those that don't. So we certainly saw it primarily in Okinawa, where they don't even have a term for retirement. We know the second most dangerous year of life here in America is the day you retire. And why is that? Do we start all these unhealthy habits like drinking too much and having unprotected sex? No. We go through life with this profound sense of purpose. And then on one day, that is gone and things askew. You have a 30% greater chance of having a heart attack in that year. What we're able to do, working with Richard Leiter, is to help people identify the 5 things they're really good at, the 5 things that they really want to do, overlay them together, and create a simple mission statement. And then what we do is bring in volunteer organizations. So these people go through a 2-hour workshop, they identify their gifts and passions, and then they're speed dated with volunteers. We know volunteers suffer lower rates of BMI, lower rates of chronic disease, and have higher well-being. So there's a great connection. That was a great question. Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, what the success of all this work is how can you not go run a marathon or go to the gym or go on a diet or take supplements because none of those things work. They're good ideas, they're short-term wins, they're long-term failures. If we have 100 people start a diet today, in 2 years you have 3 people left. It doesn't work. Same thing with gym memberships. That model is built on failure. So everything that we do at Blue Zones is something that you can get people doing every day, permanently changing their environment. I'll give you a quick example. When you go to get fruits and vegetables in your refrigerator, where do you find them? They're on the bottom door, they're hidden, they're out of sight and out of mind. What Blue Zones would suggest is on Sunday night, chop your fruits and vegetables up, put them in single-serving containers, and put them on the top shelf of your refrigerator. Wouldn't that make the healthy choice easy? Or sitting down and saying Hari Hachibu before you eat. Or disconnecting the garage door so that you're prompted to get out and actually lift it up and move naturally. It's those things that you do every day. To answer your question about your community, it's looking at how can you connect the community together. What we see and hear in every community that we're in the United States is that there's wonderful organizations and people doing great work. But it is done in silos. And because it's siloed, they're not getting the measurable results that they're looking for. So I would encourage city leaders, employers, restaurants, grocery stores, faith-based communities, schools, civic groups, and nonprofits to use evidence-based and science-backed permanent and semi-permanent changes to social networks, to building designs, to policy, to make healthier choices easy. Yes, sir. Yeah, so what we're all about is choice. What we simply do is bring forward the best practices that have been done elsewhere in the world and some things that we've created. And it's about choice. So every organization is given a list of best practices, and we ask them to do 2/3 of those things, specifically to retirees. We have what's called the Legacy Project with our schools, where kids can actually come and interview people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, even centenarians, to learn, targeted to the Power 9, asking questions and learning and sharing that with the community. These are volunteer-driven projects. So we have a steering committee that's made up. We have actual 12 sectors that we work in, and we have 10 volunteers in each. So we have a lot of retirees that are sitting on those boards. They have great expertise. They're chairing those boards. They're working with our teams to identify the strategies that most fit that community. And volunteering, in most of our cities, we have 35% of the population that is volunteering either for the project or another volunteer organizations. And we know how much that sense of purpose and those gifts mean to longevity and to happiness. But we do not track individual demographics as how far they live. In Albert Lea, we used a product called the Vitality Compass that's based on our work. It was created by the University of Minnesota, 34 questions, and as you answer them, it'll tell you how long, where you are as far as your age by your activities, how many years you have lost or gained by past behavior, and how many years you can gain by implementing small evidence-based tweaks. And we were able to measure when we started Albert E. And when we ended 13 months later, we had about 16,000 people taken. On average, they gained 3.8 years. Yes, sir. I'm not going to make any promises, but I will tell you a story. So to answer your first questions, indeed, many of these places are close to the ocean, certainly not Loma Linda, California. What's surprising is in Sardinia, we find the longest lived populations up in the highlands. And up until about 20 years ago, they didn't eat seafood, even though they lived on an island, because it was so difficult to get to by the time the fish got there. It was rotten. We do promote eating animal protein. What we found on average from these Blue Zones areas is 95% of what they ate was plant-based food. Only 5% of what they ate was animal protein. We saw some fish. We saw chicken. We see mostly pork. We saw no beef. But the biggest thing is on average, and this is a 100-year average, they eat animal protein on average 5 times a month. Average portion size is 3 ounces, size of a deck of cards, and it was usually on a celebratory event. So we certainly don't tell people to become vegan or vegetarian, but I think there's a lot to say about increasing plant intake and a lot of medical research behind it. The next question, can you move to a blue zone and live longer? There is an article I strongly encourage you to read called The Island That Forgot to Die. It was an article that Dan wrote in the New York Times, and it was about a gentleman by the name of Stamitis Moriartis. He had moved to New York during World War II. He got married, had kids, bought a house. He was a painter. At about age 65, he was diagnosed with stage 4 terminal lung cancer. And he went to 4 different doctors. They all gave him the same diagnoses. And instead of going on chemo, radiation, he decided to simply move back to Korea. He wanted to be buried with his ancestors. He got back. He was in bed for about 2 months. Friends started to come. His family was there. He started to feel a little better. He said, I got to get out of this bed. I'm going to plant a garden. I won't be able to harvest it, but my family will. Well, what happened was 6 months came and went. He did not die. He actually felt better and just eased himself back into life. Dan caught up with him and did an article and had me call Stamitis. I got on the phone rang, phone answers, I hear, yeah, what do you want? I said, Stamitis, it's Tony Buettner, and he's at age 103 at this time. I said, Dan has asked me to call and ask one question. Why do you think you were cured of terminal lung cancer? He said, I don't know. It just happened. But he said, that's an interesting question, Tony, because about 20 years ago, I was back in New York, and I went to see them doctors, see what they had to say about it. I said, well, what'd they say? Nothing. They're all dead. Thank you very much.
Great talk, Tony. I noticed you didn't eat the roast beef sandwich with lunch today now. Is that a problem?
Not at all.
Anyways, well, Rotary is a group of 1.2 million people around the world, and we're all working for a common good. And we have 6 areas of focus, and one of them is supporting education. And so in honor of your talk, we're going to donate a book to the Edina school system. So
Thank you so much.
yeah, hopefully it can be Dan's book.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Those Buettner boys are so inspiring. Thank you for your presentation today, Tony. And thanks for telling us a little bit more about Steve. We get these little drips, these little pieces of information out. It also, I didn't plan to talk about this today. You might recall a few years ago, I wanted to get a kickball league going, get a team from Rotary. I'd like to put that challenge out again. Feeling inspired. Kickball or maybe beanbag toss. We could start slow. So if you're interested, you let me know. Typically at the end of the meeting, I share an inspirational quote reminding us of our ability to be a gift to the world. Today, though, I'd like to close with a story about one of our own members who was a gift to others last week, actually earlier this week. As some of you know, one of Doug Johnson's grandchildren, Meryl, has been very, very ill. She's been hospitalized 3 times in the past month with a mysterious infection. When doctors decided last weekend to have her come back to the hospital again, they wanted to have the expander in her mouth taken out to make sure that it wasn't causing her headaches, or they were concerned it might in fact be a source of the infection. That was on Easter Sunday. Brad is Meryl's orthodontist, and he was contacted, and he said he would do whatever he could to help Meryl in that situation. Brad contacted his dad, and they talked about expanders and whether or not they'd ever heard of an expander causing an infection or any other sinus-related problem. They agreed that, no, this isn't related to the illness. And at that point, Brad could have said, well, bring her in on Monday, I'll take it out, or, you can go ahead and take it out. But instead, on Easter, he drove to the emergency room, and he did the procedure himself to take that out, even though he knew that expander likely had nothing to do with the concerns of the other doctors. That, Brad, is service above self. Meryl had her surgery without the expander, and she was able to come home on Wednesday. So thank you, Brad, for modeling service above self and for showing others how to be a gift to the world. Please follow Brad's example this week. Meeting adjourned.